So we're going to tie a blue dun emerger, and similar to the other flies that we've been tying, we want to pinch down the barb of the hook before we tie the fly. And again, it is something that makes it faster to release the fish after we've landed them. It also keeps us in compliance with any of the regulations for the waters that require barbless hooks. And frankly, I don't notice any increased losses and stuff where the fish comes off with the barbless hooks than I did the barbs. It actually makes it easier to have the hook penetrate the jaw of the fish, and that gives you a better hookup. But the part that I like doing it for the most is that when we happen to make a bad cast and we hit ourselves with the fly, it makes it much easier to remove that from our shirt or our hat, or unfortunately sometimes arms. And so it's a safety reason. So we've placed the hook where the shank of the hook, which is basically the part of the hook that's straight, is roughly parallel to the tabletop. And we're going to add the thread by spiral wrapping 3 or 4 wraps forward and then coming back over the top of that. And that's called a jam knot. And then we can take the excess part of the thread called the tag end, and we can cut that off. And then we're going to lay a thread base down by bringing the thread towards the back of the fly and then back up to the front. You'll notice I'm working with maybe an inch of thread is all, so that way I can wrap very quickly up to the front and back, laying down the thread base. But I also can control where the thread is being positioned on the hook with that short distance much better than if I was using a longer length of thread. Now, for the tail, we're going to take a few barbs of a mallard flank feather that happens to be dyed yellow. That's designed to imitate the coloring of a wood duck feather. And we're going to just pull a few of those off of the stem of the hook, so that and that's something that, as I look at that, there was one that the barb was broken, and so I want to have about 4 of the barbs. So there was only 3 right there, and since I happen to have a number of these, I'll go ahead and just pull some out to the side, and we'll do it a little differently right here with the scissors and cut a length and then pull out a few of those so that we have some ready for the next fly. So there's about 4 barbs of the flank feather. And since these are very, very flexible, instead of tying those on like we have some of the other flies, what I'm going to do is put this at about a 45-degree angle to the hook shank and make 1 wrap of thread. And then what I'm going to do is reposition this because that thread wrap was loose. Now I can shorten by pulling on the end of this and get the barbs to where they're about the same length as what the rest of the fly is. So you can see we've got a fly length of about that. We've got the tails still just a little bit longer than what we want, so let's shorten them up a bit more. And now that we've got them positioned where we want, and even though there's 4 ends to the feather, you see how that's very wispy? From aesthetics, I want to have just a little bit more. And so I'm going to add a few more feathers in there just so that they're a little bit more noticeable. And there, we've got those pulled up onto the top of the hook shank. I'm going to lift them up, and I'm going to put 1 wrap of thread underneath, and then a wrap right there. And now we've got the barbs coming back the way that we want. And I'm going to wrap this forward a little bit just to make sure that they're well attached to the hook shank. And then I'll trim the excess and come back. Now what we're going to do is take some of the gray dubbing and pull that out, and we want to tease out just some very small amounts and twist that onto the thread so that we build up a little bit of bulk, a little bit of color. I'm going to call it kind of a way of creating a yarn, but what it is it's just adding dubbing to the thread to give us a little bit more gray to build the thickness up for the abdomen. And so you see right here, it's a little thicker there than it is on the edges. So I'll tease out a bit more and put that up here, and a bit more for down here at the bottom. And now we've got a length of yarn that's about that big. And for this size hook, I think that will probably be about the length that we want. So I come to the back, now I'm wrapping forward, and there we go. That gives us a nice smooth body. And we're stopping right about here, and we're going to add a little bit of marabou. I've got a few errant fibers right there that I don't want to fight with later, so I'm just going to trim those and get them out of the way. Then I'll set that down. And we're going to take a marabou feather, and we're going to pull a few clumps of the barbs off of that feather. And that's probably a few more than what we want, but I want to stroke these down to the end. And with marabou, we don't want to cut them with the scissor, but if we take the fingers and pull them apart, then we have something that will make a very nice wing. And so we can measure that, very carefully pull a loop right here. I'm bringing the thread over between my thumb and finger and then positioning it to the far side and pulling it straight down, and that keeps the length of the wing up above. And so with those two wraps, we're still loose enough that we can pull this forward and get it to where that's about to the end of the body. And now I want to put some locking wraps in place, without spinning the marabou around the shank too much. I'm going to do this allowing my right hand to be dominant, even though that blocked your view. I'm sorry about that. Then we'll trim off the excess bit of the marabou. And I'm just checking to see, we want to trim that and get that out of the way. Now we can take our hackle, and you can use soft hackle, or you can use the dry fly hackle. And since this is an emerger, I want it to stay on top. This will keep it floating a little bit longer. And so what we'll do is we'll trim a few of the barbs on either side of the stem, and that creates a small place there that we can catch underneath the thread. And so we'll tie that in, and then we're going to take this and make a couple of wraps in front of the wing. Then we'll lift and put the locking wraps in. And now I'm going to cut this excess feather. And then I like to stroke some of those pieces back, get them out of the way, and then I'm going to make a few wraps of thread right there just to create the head of the fly. And then once we've got that, I like to pull a little bit of thread out here, make a loop, 1.5 wraps there, and one part of the loop above the top and the other under the bottom, and that's called a double hitch. And then if we put 2 or 3 of those on the fly, then we'll have everything finished. And with the dry fly, I like to avoid building up quite as much bulk. And so on this one, since everything seems to be held together well, then we'll go ahead and cut the thread. and we've got a very nice blue dun emerger.